goes. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to the Groovy Podcast. This is Season 2, Episode 3, I believe. Or if you're keeping track at home, I think that's Episode 52. We're up into those numbers now. My name is Ken Kousen. I'm podcasting from Marlborough, Connecticut. And with me, as always, is our good friend
Baruch Sadogursky, broadcasting from Sunnyvale, California. Hey, everybody.
Hey, welcome to the new year.
Yes.
We managed to let it go once again to the point where it was too long. You know, we let it go too long before we had a podcast. We tried to do one earlier, but I was traveling and I thought, well, I'll make it home and I'll go ahead and set up a podcast. And I wound up not making it. You know, just it was a Friday afternoon. There just wasn't enough energy to do it.
No, I think too long. It's been too long. Is our signature timing for doing a new episode.
Yes, you're absolutely right about that, and that's what I was thinking. So it was time to try again. How are you doing these days? Are you spending some time at home at all?
Yeah. No, I had a good break. The winter break, and starting next week, I'm officially on the spring conferences madness. So I have spring conference madness and then fall conference.
For a second. I'm sorry, would you repeat that again? I heard something about the spring something, and that's funny.
Yeah, spring conferences madness officially starts next week. And it goes all the way to actually summer, and then a couple of months, and then there is a fall conferences madness.
So when you say spring, you mean the season, not the framework.
Yeah, the season, not the framework, yeah.
Yes, exactly. Because, of course, if you were going to do spring, you might as well do Grails, and
if I do Spring, I might also do Kotlin, and then not going there. No,
we're going to go there that early. We just started, man. I mean, already we're going to start talking about Kotlin. Okay, I actually have been kind of a mixture here. I'm trying to do as many training classes on Safari Books Online these days because that way I get to teach from home. So that's helpful. But that said, I did manage to give a Java presentation at the Chicago Java Users Group a couple weeks ago. And then back in December, I did one at the Dallas, the Fort Worth area, the so-called Java Mug, they call it down there, as well. So that was a lot of fun. And there will be some more things I'm going to be doing coming up, and I'll mention that later. But other than that, I've been doing the online stuff. So that's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, and you are doing it from home, which is a big advantage of the online stuff.
Yeah, I'm not the world traveler that you are, and frankly, I'm okay with that.
I can imagine. Yeah, we had this Facebook thread of people comparing their last year stats, and none of us could actually figure out what win is.
Yes.
Is it like a large number or the small number?
Exactly. Yes.
Consider the win. Yeah.
See, on the No Fluff Just Stuff tour, which starts again at the end of February, I guess, and we're into February now. You believe it? It's February 1st. So, at any rate, in the No Fluff Just Stuff tour, then we have we used to have a Tripit group to keep track of everybody's travel. Venkat Subramanian doesn't even bother participating in that anymore because it just wouldn't be fair. You know, he's still in the middle of his 50 user groups in 50 weeks tour. I think he spent a week. Was it last week? He did 5 user groups in Switzerland in 5 days, just traveling all over the country, and then went from there to some conference in Germany as well, some Agile Developer Conference. But that's Venkat, you know.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I wanted to say. Competing with Venkat on anything wouldn't be fair. I mean, not only Miles.
Right. So that's kind of silly, but there it is. Neil Ford, as I recall, he's an architect at ThoughtWorks, so he does lots of these things. And I think last year he actually did one of those around the world tickets. You know how you can get a plane ticket to go all the way around the world? It turned out, if you play it right, you can get an around the world business class ticket for not a lot more money than it would take for me, for example, to fly to India once, you know. So that was kind of amazing. Personally, I wound up with 1K status on United and silver status on Delta. So that's still too much, but it's, you know, at least, and it may be less this year. I may have difficulty achieving any of those goals this year.
So again, considering you might consider it as a win.
Right, right.
Yeah,
Exactly.
and actually, one of the books I read, actually, I don't remember. It had this example of some motivational stuff. It has this example of some business executive that actually tried to achieve not having status in any airline.
Yeah,
That was his goal for the year.
but that's terrible.
Losing all the statuses.
I mean, airline status is all about the upgrades, and man, who wants to fly in steerage anymore? And I mean, otherwise, I assume that if he wanted no status, he must have paid for the upgrades automatically. I did actually spend a few days a couple weeks ago in Cancun, Mexico, and the reason I bring it up, well, the reason I bring it up, other than it was nice and warm, is that I got to hang out and talk to Jeff Brown, our friend there, who is a core team member at Grails for Grails, and he is now, by the way, I don't know if you're aware, he is now a partner at OCI.
Well, I think congratulations are in order, and if there is someone who deserves it, that will be Scott Brown. His contribution to Grails, and I hope to OCI's business as well, cannot be overstated. He's amazing.
Yes, I still think the jury's out on how successful Grails is ultimately going to be, but I honestly believe OCI is doing everything in their power to make this work. They are really moving heaven and earth. They're doing extraordinary things to bring Grails to the current generation of developers. It's up to the generation of developers as to whether they will accept it or not, but they are really working hard. And it was good to see Jeff and to spend a morning on our quote vacation hashing out various Grails issues that I'd encountered in a couple of training classes, you know, porting things up to 3 and having him say, but that's supposed to be easy. And I'm going, yeah, well, but at any rate. But he was very kind about it. He was very kind about it. Okay, so let's dive into our news items. Again,
I think before we dive into our own news items, while we are on the community and talking about our friends, I think I want to, both of us want to extend our condolences to Guillaume because of the loss he had in his family. Guillaume, we are extremely sorry to hear about that, and our condolences and our warmest regards are with you.
Absolutely. Again, for those few people who may not be aware, that's Guillaume LaForge. G LaForge on Twitter has been the head of the Groovy project basically almost from the beginning. I mean, within a year or two from the creation of the project itself, he has been a good steward for the project. Others have picked up a lot of the day-to-day efforts. You know, Paul King is very active there, but Guillaume is one of the fundamental reasons why this is successful, and he's just enormously influential in this community. And of course, we would express our sympathies for him under any circumstances, but he is such a good friend and such a wonderful individual that you know, we definitely are. I hate to use the term thoughts and prayers, but they're with him at this time, and anything we can do, of course, we're happy to do so for him.
Absolutely. Yep.
Okay. So now going to some of these news items, I should remind our listeners now, when the Groovy Podcast appears, of course, it shows up in various Twitter feeds. In the Groovy Podcast Twitter feed, it also shows up on iTunes and on Podbean. But we do have a homepage for the Groovy Podcast. This is at nofluffjuststuff.com/Groovy Podcast. All the podcasts wind up showing there with a link. And on that page, they also have a link to the show notes. The show notes appear at a GitHub account under our friend Peter Ledbrook. So github.com/pledbrook/Groovy Podcast has the entire list of show notes going all the way back as far as we've been keeping track of them. So that's what I'm looking at now is the show notes. And usually we like to start by just identifying the current versions of the major products in the Groovy ecosystem. Groovy has not had a new release, I don't believe, in a little while. They're under the Apache process, which is a lot more, I don't want to say tedious, but a lot more rigorous, I suppose. By the way, I'm sorry, did you want to say anything about the Groovy releases or not? Or there's something I want to throw in after that when you're done?
Yeah, no, I think that the pause that is going on now is due to work on those major milestones, major versions of 2.6 and 3.0. I think that's why things are slowing down on the normal release train.
Well, it's also a pretty stable product at this point. And then there aren't a lot of developers who have as their funded day-to-day occupation working on Groovy. The grand exception, of course, being Paul King, who works for OCI, and he's their chief Groovy person, obviously. He works especially on Groovy features that tie into Grails. We talked to him, we interviewed him late last year at the G3 Summit. But I want to mention, I didn't put it in the show notes. This is going to come up in another month or two. I was contacted by Andrew Binstock. He's the editor of the Java magazine, the one directly from Oracle. And he was asking about an article describing the new features coming in Groovy 3. And of course, I collected information about the macro system and the new parrot parser and everything. And that will be coming up. So I submitted that. The article's been accepted. I think we're finished revising it. They just released an issue of Java Magazine talking about reactive streams and everything. But I think the next issue, probably March, April timeframe, will have an article about Groovy in it. Any area I'm team mostly just say what I've learned from others. But one of the key features, of course, and this is finally what ties it back into our show notes, is that there are currently multiple versions of Groovy in process. We have our stable version, which is the 2.4 line, which is currently at 2.4.13. And then we have the next one in the current line, which will be 2.5. That's in beta 2 at this point. The big feature that will be added are these macros. And we actually had an interview, I guess it's probably a whole year ago or a little longer, with Sergey Egorov.
Yep.
Yes, I was
Sergey Egorov, yep.
Right, and he's one of the main guys behind, he may be the main guy behind the macro capability. We'll have to revisit that when that's released, but just for people who are not aware, and I had to dig into it myself again, basically, if you're writing an AST transformation, you need to know the builder code to assemble nodes and how to hook them all together, and you kind of have to think like a compiler. And what the macro process does is it gives you blocks and annotations that will let you write regular old Groovy code, and it will convert that Groovy code into the node manipulation code associated with AST transforms. So it's not going to affect most developers' day-to-day operations, but it will make it much, much easier to build AST transforms, and that'll help everybody. So that's the big feature in 2.5. 2.6 is a little bit of a temporary thing, so let's jump to 3 and then I'll mention it. 3.0 is going to use the new parrot parser. The big feature, of course, will be all the Java 8 support with all the new syntax and everything. There's also a whole bunch of smaller features, which we'll mention when it comes out. The only reason I skipped over 2.6 is 3.0 is going to require Java SE 8. That'll be the first version of Groovy that requires Java 8. And in an attempt to backport as many of those features as possible to people who are stuck on Java 7, that's the purpose of 2.6. So 2.6 is like a temporary holding pattern for those people who are waiting to upgrade to Java SE 8. Really, it'll be 3.0 when all is said and done. And all that's going to happen sometime this year. It's all under development. I'd have to ask Paul King, I imagine, for the time frame on that.
Yeah, and this is very exciting. 3.0 is something that we are waiting eagerly for. The parrot parser should modernize Groovy and bring it to the level of other, I would say, languages, and the support that we are waiting, using it with Java 8, and Groovy 3.0 is like a breath of fresh air that we are eagerly wait for.
I was able to use the Groovy console with the 3.0 alpha. That worked just fine. And I tried to make a project inside of IntelliJ where I used the 3.0 Groovy dependency inside a Gradle build, and IntelliJ was seriously confused about the new syntax. But the project built, everything ran, everything was working, including the new triple equals operator that calls is, and the Elvis assignment operator, question mark equals, and whole range of things. So that was my first chance to really play with it, and I did not encounter any problems. Everything worked as advertised inside the release notes. So hopefully that's just going to fill out the rest of the capabilities. It also gave me a chance again to play with traits a little bit. That's how they're doing the Java default methods, is that they basically just delegate to traits inside.
Yeah, and that's smart, elegant, and makes a lot of sense. The default methods are basically traits in weird Java syntax limitations, but they are traits actually. This is exactly what it is.
Yeah, it's just
so it only makes sense.
Traits allow us to use attributes as well, and of course they can't do that in Java interfaces yet. You can put in default methods and static methods. I'm not sure how they're going to handle the static methods yet. So I'm not sure that's allowed in traits yet. I don't know about that. I'll have to check on that. A question came up about the name Parrot on the Parrot parser, and somebody reminded me, I think it was our friend Eric Helgeson, who wrote the Practical Grails 3 book, which I hope is doing really well. I should mention that. Actually, a week ago, I was in central Minnesota. Again, my goal apparently is to teach a Grails class in the coldest possible environment, wherever that might be. So we were aiming for central Minnesota in January.
Nice.
I missed cold by about a week or two. It was actually not that bad, But in case you're not aware, Eric Helgeson lives in that area. He's in the Twin Cities. Well, not down to the Twin Cities, but he's up near St. Cloud in Minnesota. I got to see his wife as well, Jackie, who's also a developer. She also works on Groovy and Grails related projects. And Eric is doing very well, for those who are curious, and he's supporting the book and very happy to have people access it. And just a reminder, it's not in the show notes, but the link to access the only existing book on Grails 3 right now is at grails3book.com. It's an actual 3, Grails and then a number 3 book.com to go with that. Very good book there. The other reason I'm thinking of that, though, is that one of the changes that's been made in Grails, see, we're still on 3.3.2 now, but they keep making some modifications. And one of the modifications they've done relatively recently is that Grails tests now are entirely based on traits. There's no metaprogramming at all anymore. There's no AST transforms or runtime metaprogramming. It's all based on traits. And in fact, I think that's a really good example of why and how to use traits. So I used that as an example when I was showing off what a trait meant, was some of the domain unit test trait or the controller unit test trait, which provides methods to acquire the domain object or the controller, etc. So at any rate, Grails is still at 3.3.2. I know they're working on the next version there, and we'll see how that comes. I did get a chance to play with the application Forge.
Yep.
The new app, that was fun. So that, again, that's pretty stable from our last time we talked about.
Yes, that's pretty much the same. Yep.
Now the next one, of course, is Gradle. Gradle released 4.5. Was it this week? I think it might have been just a few days ago.
It was a few days ago. Yes.
Yeah, they'd been on a release candidate. Now they're on to Gradle 4.5, which gives me a chance to remind everybody, of course, about the awesomeness of SDK Man, right? The SDK Manager, which is managed by Marco Vermeulen. Wonderful product there. And if you are on a Mac or any Unix-based system, using it is a no-brainer. So you can install Gradle 4.5 using SDK Man, or you could do the normal download and install. I didn't look at the bunch of new features there. Did you look at any of that stuff in Gradle 4.5?
I think it's, again, a very heavy performance-oriented release. And I saw some numbers and some comparisons with Maven, and it's not even a fair fight anymore. I mean, it's like they were behind, and they have the goal of catching up with Maven, and now it's like, I don't know how many 100 times faster than Maven.
They are really attacking that very aggressively. I mean,
that's thanks to Cedric Champeau which is again a big fellow. I guess he has very little to do with Groovy anymore, unfortunately. But from what I understand, he leads this performance effort in Gradle and does a great job there.
Yeah, he's certainly one of them. It's always good to hear from Cedric, and I do think he's still aware of the DSL part, which I think is all still in Groovy. Now, the sad part, of course, is that they are adding in the Kotlin DSL as well. But I suppose it's not really sad. We laugh about it, but it's good that a product like Gradle, which is still related to Groovy and still supports Groovy in many ways, is now going to have multiple mechanisms and simply become more pervasive in the environment. You know, I had another person I saw on that vacation was Neil Ford. I mentioned him earlier. Mm-hmm. He talks to a lot of the enterprise people, you know, the C-level executives and people on that level, and he's firmly of the opinion that as good as Gradle gets and as good as the performance will be, that it's not going to necessarily replace Maven. And his argument is that companies just already have Maven, and if you tell them that we want to replace that with something that's supported by this tiny little company over here, they're not going to be eager to hear that. I personally think that's overly cynical. I think that performance will win, and Gradle's performance, as you say, is vastly better than anything Maven related nowadays. So I'm very optimistic about the future of Gradle, despite the fact that a lot of organizations, especially large ones, tend to be overly conservative in these areas.
Yeah, so funny that you mentioned will stick around. I just had lunch with another big friend of Groovy community, Ray Tsang, a developer advocate at Google, and we ended up in this Gradle Maven discussion, obviously. And Ray was like, I don't know why people complain is Maven. For what I'm doing, Maven is just fine. And then we start talking about that his use case of doing like those small demos and the small projects which are not enterprisey or complicated in any way is this narrow path that you actually gain the most from the rigidness of Maven. And if all you need to do is Maven archetype create Java project and then compile this Java code and get a jar or a war out of it, Maven is fine. You don't need anything else. So there were obviously use cases in which the heavily opinionated nature of Maven gives you benefits.
Right, and we had a discussion like that on an expert panel. Well, although I tend to call that the pretend to be expert panel, you know, because I'm on it. In an expert panel at the No Fluff conference, Matt Stein, who is a major player at Pivotal these days, he's I think he's actually one of the CTOs there now, also likes Maven, and the reason is the same reason you described, is that he likes having restrictions. He likes having it so that he doesn't have so many choices. It's the the paradox of choice that people worry about. We have too many choices, you don't know what to do. And immediately the response from the other panelists was Stockholm syndrome, you know.
Yeah. No, we love to have a lot of jokes on Maven, and it's fine. And seriously speaking, for a second, I see the two use cases which are still very, very valid for Maven, and one is I only do Hello World and I show it to people, and when I show it to people, the last thing I need is for them to concentrate on build and try to figure out what my script does. And that's a valid use case. I want a no-brainer build, and I say, okay, this is like standard Maven stuff. But you know it, forget about it. So this is one, and the second would be those organizations in which, knowing the level of your team, you actually want them to be as restricted as possible when it comes to build.
Yeah, I know you're exactly right, and I have philosophical objections, especially to that latter one. I'm much more of the opinion that you give your developers the flexibility and the freedom to do what they need to do, but I know a lot of teams don't act that way. When I introduce Gradle to new people, I always say that every build ultimately becomes a custom build, and Gradle was designed with that in mind. Plus, Gradle gives you extraordinary performance benefits these days over anything Maven related.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
yes, if you can write great Maven plugins, you can make Maven sing. I get that. But if you just want to do basic, simple stuff in Gradle, that's easy.
Yeah, so yeah, no, I just love to be on top of developer advocate, devil advocate as well. So I have fun in those exchanges and arguments. So I can definitely see where people that like Maven, what their point is, and yeah.
And if you talk to people at Google, you should remind them, of course, that, hey, Guillaume LaForge works there. You've got the head of the project, for crying out loud, you know. But I know it's a big, vast community, and they have their own build tool too. And you know, the Gradle people are all aware of this. But hey, you know, Google supports Gradle in a way. I mean, every Android project, the only officially supported build tool for that is Gradle. So it's in there, you know. Okay, moving on.
Yeah, absolutely.
There was a release that was announced, I saw on the Apache Groovy Twitter feed, that CodeNarc came out with 1.1 with a bunch of new rules and some various updates there. Do you use CodeNarc at all, by the way?
I played with it, and I obviously know what it is and how to use it. I don't have any current projects that use it, but I'm a big fan. I think that's a wonderful project. This is one of those things that you have alternatives which are obviously not as good as the Groovy option, right? It's true for a lot of stuff, for Spock, for HTTP Builder, and CodeNarc is one of them. It just takes something that others do and actually make it of user experience.
Yeah, I mean, CodeNarc, for those who have not used it before, is basically a code quality tool.
Static code analysis tool, yes.
Exactly, static code analysis that works for Groovy. And it's very effective. It's clearly the leader in that marketplace for the Groovy ecosystem, certainly. And it's easy to use. It can be driven by Gradle or Maven or what have you, and that's very good. I was very pleased to see there was a whole series of tweets that came out on the Groovy Eclipse, on the changes in the Groovy Eclipse plugin. This was done on the Apache Groovy Twitter feed again, but the Groovy plugin for Eclipse has been stagnant for quite some time. Clearly, somebody's working on it now because they have improved it in a lot of small, interesting ways, and it also now supposedly supports the latest versions of Groovy and the latest versions of Eclipse and JUnit and everything.
Yep.
I mean, obviously, I'm sorry. Do you use Eclipse at all anymore?
Yeah. So no, that's what I want to mention. I think that the official ID of this podcast is obviously IntelliJ IDEA, and I think both of us can agree that it's way more superior generally as Java as JVM language IDE, and the Groovy support is a completely different level, so I don't know why anyone would use Eclipse those days, but here we go.
You do know why, and it's because a company insists that they use a free tool.
Well, Groovy is supported in the open source version of IntelliJ IDEA, which is free as well. So that's argument won't stand.
That's absolutely true. That's a good point.
And if going back to those holy wars about tools and IDEs, I definitely can see the point of Maven advocates. Of me, I cannot see a single reason of using Eclipse those days, but that will be just me.
Well, I'm glad there's improving Groovy support in Eclipse.
That's for sure.
Legacy people that have not made a transition, or that have a team that has standardized on that product, or for whatever reason. Of course, you get a lot of people on derivative products like Spring Tool Suite, based on Eclipse. And those people, it would be good to enable them to be able to use Groovy as well, especially because Groovy and Grails Tool Suite is dead. In fact, that's a problem in the community, which hopefully will become a smaller problem over time, is that there is no Grails support at all in any Eclipse variant that I know of. The Grails support right now that was in Groovy and Grails Tool Suite is so buggy and collapsed and everything. It's hardly worth the frustration. So, at least somebody's working on the Groovy plugin. I don't know that anybody's ever going to pick up the Grails plugin for Eclipse. But anyway, we just have to live with that.
No, but I mean, it's good that there is progress. I don't know how critical it is, because why would you even bother?
Okay. There was a nice blog post by our friend Ben Mushko, who works for Gradle, of course. But Ben wrote a blog post comparing JUnit 5 to Spock as what he called a feature showdown. And it's an extensive post. It's really long, going through feature by feature on all of that. And then there were some comments, and he updated the post based on those comments. I'm waiting to see, personally, whether JUnit 5 is adopted by the community. I mean, it's been out now for several months, but most people consider unit testing to be a solved problem. They don't want to relearn JUnit, which is something they thought they understood, and then find out even little, the test annotation or the before annotation is now before each, for example. I mean, just even little things have changed fundamentally. Have you seen anybody move to JUnit 5 yet?
So I heard some people that are evaluating JUnit 5, and the path to it was to actually start evaluating was very interesting. So obviously, of all the options of unit testing, JUnit was unfortunately for many years the less superior. There was Spock and others, and I saw people that step away from Spock because of the stagnation that happened a couple of years ago after Peter Netherweiser left the project, and looked for an alternative and tried a couple of things, and now they look for a salvation in JUnit 5. My answer for those people would be just go back to Spock and enjoy life. But it's kind of those people that look for something that will give them back the power that they used to have in Spock. Those are the people who are early adopters of JUnit 5. That's what I know.
I mean, JUnit 5 does have something like parameterized tests that are similar to what Spock has, but we don't have to go down through the features. Ben already did that. In my opinion, that blog post merely made it clear that Spock is superior to all of these things, and that JUnit 5 at best provides equivalent capability, so that the only reason not to use Spock is if you are committed to Java and aren't interested in doing anything in Groovy. But I think Spock is right now probably the primary driver to new people to the Groovy ecosystem. It's still the state-of-the-art best testing tool out there, not to mention the fact that Rob Fletcher wrote that wonderful book on Java testing with Spock, although that's not what he called it. The Java testing with Spock book at Manning was written by Konstantin Kapolonis, I believe. So we've got two books on testing with Spock, and Rob Fletcher's book is one of the best books on testing anything I've ever seen. So hopefully that will continue, and I'm glad he did the feature rundown, that Ben Mushko did the feature rundown, but I think Spock still won that, at least that's my impression.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, now there was another one of these articles by BlazeMeter, this time talking about doing Cassandra load testing with Groovy. I have a difficult time with those, not because of the article, but because the website has all these pop-ups and all these, it won't leave you alone about registering or signing up for a newsletter or you want to talk to somebody, because they're trying to sell a product, obviously. But it is nice to see that they are trying to build additional capabilities that use Groovy to accomplish the tasks they want to accomplish. I think you worked with some of that stuff before. Is that right?
Yeah, so BlazeMeter, we know BlazeMeter from both as an independent company, and now is part of CA, as a part of continuous integration delivery pipelines that we work with, and stress testing is an important part of it. So we are familiar with those kind of tools, and I think BlazeMeter did a very, very good job in unleashing the power of cloud for stress testing. It made stress testing much easier and much closer to the real stresses that people experience in production, and can simulate them using cloud. and considering the two main stress testing tools, which is JMeter that on and Gatling, we as Groovy community, JMeter is obviously much closer to us because of the Groovy DSL that it has, comparing to, I would say, a nightmarish DSL that Gatling has, which is in Scala. And I know I'm stupid. I'm not smart enough to learn this magnificent language. But every time I need to do something with Gatling, I'm in agony. This is just horrible. But that's me. I'm just not smart enough. I give you that.
Well, I think you made the Blaze Meter people very happy. I'm sure they're going to enjoy a little podcast.
Yeah, they give away guitars on trade shows and conferences, so I expect to accidentally win a guitar in their completely random raffle that they do at the next conference.
Well, at any rate, I put a link in the show notes, so if anybody wants to investigate it, it's there. Now, there was another very short but interesting blog post talking about something I've had an issue with periodically. And the blog post was by Dan Vega talking about how to compile Groovy before Java in a Gradle build. And where I had encountered that in the past was when you were applying an AST transform to the Groovy code that needed to be completed before the Java code encountered it. You know, because the AST transform will add all these mechanisms to the bytecodes, and I want them to be there. The one I happened to be using at the time was the add immutable AST transform, and I wanted to make an immutable object in Groovy and then use that in Java code. And if you haven't seen it, what the blog post basically says is that you set up your source sets, and you basically say that the source set for source main Java is nothing, but the source directory for source main Groovy is, and you put source dirs, you list source main Groovy first and then source main Java. And the claim is that this will compile the code in source main Groovy and then compile the code in source main Java based on it. Now, I personally haven't tested that, and I kind of feel like I'd like to talk to some of the Gradle people and see if this is something they would agree with or not. But I like the idea, you know, and I like that it has an extremely simple solution if this works. And, of course, his example that he did worked. Anyway, I thought I'd put it in the show notes, and maybe we'll hear from somebody from Gradle, or I can go ask somebody at Gradle and see whether they agree that this is the right solution for that problem.
Yeah, and it generally looks like, you know, that's, come on, how hard can it be? Why we even need a blog post about it? And apparently it is a big deal. And I understand why the default order will be Java before Groovy, but Groovy is so powerful in interop with Java that it really should support both ways.
Well, and my customary approach when mixing Groovy and Java in a project is to put everything under source main Groovy, you know, not to use a separate source
exactly.
at all,
yep.
And let the Groovy compiler take it from there. But okay, interesting to see an approach. If you do separate out different source trees under different languages, I have a feeling some of that's going to be changing in Gradle 5. You know, I don't know if they favor that anymore. You're starting to get warnings in the Gradle versions like 4.3 or 4 or 5 about doing that sort of thing. So they must be discussing that. Notice, by the way, of course, in Grails 3, they replaced source Groovy and source Java. Now they simply have source main Groovy for all Groovy and Java classes that you want added to the class path. And then again, they let the compiler resolve the differences in there. So I don't know whether it's a recommended approach to separate the code bases anymore, and this is an approach. But it was an interesting blog post, and I have been so neglecting of my blog recently that I feel like I ought to at least mention them when they come up, you know.
Yep.
Now, bringing us to a few things that I found in, of course, the wonderful Groovy Calamari newsletter. They pointed out that OCI is now doing, in addition to their regular training classes, which are based on Grails, they're doing something called Grails Sketches, which are 1-hour free online webinars to introduce technologies around Grails development. And I believe the next one is February 9th, I think, so that'd be a week from tomorrow, so a week from Friday, that is going to be talking about using Grails with React, you know, in case you want to use the React profile. Now, of course, they have a full training class for that, where they spend a day or two on it, but this is a 1-hour webinar that'll be done by our good friend Zach Klein. and he's going to demonstrate how to put all that together. They're having a series of these. And again, I cannot fault OCI for any difficulty with the Grails penetration in the marketplace. OCI is doing everything they can, and that's a very helpful option. So if you're interested, feel free to, be sure to take a look at the OCI website and check out those the free training seminars. I think they're doing roughly one a month, something like that.
Yeah, so they have February 9, March 9th, and then April 6th. So yeah, every month. Yep.
What were the other two topics, if you happen to be staring at it at the moment?
Build a better API with GORM and GraphQL.
Right.
That will be the March one, and the April one will be database migration with Grails 3.
Database migration with what?
Grails 3.
Oh, just with the generic the migration plugin, presumably inside of Grails. Mm-hmm. I'm really bad at that. I generally either work with an existing database or I let Grails create my database, and I don't worry about the migration stuff. But the people who do migration swear by it.
One of the most complicated topics of software update database migration. And this is something, again, that's very dear to our heart here in JFrog, because we provide tools to support what we call the continuous update, and that's in the matter of on the same way of continuous delivery and continuous deployment, the ability to continuously update your software. And while we know how to easily update stateless applications, the schema migration and the data migration is the most painful part of any software update.
Interesting. Well, speaking of that, of course, there's two grades that have come out again from OCI since the last time we talked. One of them is exactly that topic you mentioned, building a GORM/GraphQL app with React and Apollo. I'm not sure what Apollo is, but then again, I don't use React, etc. So they have a guide on that now. They have a couple of guides related to Docker. One was called Using Docker to Provide External Services to Your Grails app that use Postgres, and learn to use a Postgres database in your Grails app with a Docker container. And another one was how to distribute, well, it says Grails as a Docker container. Learn how to distribute your Grails app as a Docker container as well, which I'm sure will be useful to somebody.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so one other thing under the news items, I didn't know where else to put it. Jenn Strater, another good friend who's been on the podcast a few times, has been very active lately. I didn't get a chance to add it to the show notes, but I think she has she started a Groovy user group, I think, in Berlin, I believe, as I recall. Yep. Also, she has been working with this group of university students down in Cameroon. Last year, as I recall, there was an effort to run a training class to teach them Groovy and/or Grails. This year, she's kind of expanding that, and now they are running this great DI mentorship program where they're matching students working on Groovy or Grails-related projects with people who are willing to be a remote mentor on that. I'm a participant. I don't know what I can offer. I suppose most people feel like that as soon as the word senior becomes attached to your name, But I will admit that I feel like I'm getting to the point in my career where I should spend as much time trying to help the next generation as doing whatever, accomplishing further things myself. And so I'm more than happy to share my own training materials for Groovy or Grails, or help out with advice and stuff. And we'll see how it goes. I was matched with an individual. I think this is roughly a 6-week program or more. Should probably talk to Jenn about it separately and see if she wants to come on the podcast and discuss it. But right now it's fun. We haven't hit any hard problems yet. I do recall seeing a tweet from her where one of the students really wanted to do a desktop app, and she was looking for somebody to help. And, somebody who knows Griffin, obviously, would do that. So, obviously, I hope Andres Almiray jumped right in on that, but I don't know if he did or not.
Yeah.
Anyway, she's working on this mentorship program and connecting students. I think she's also quietly doing some job placement as part of that, too, or maybe that's a separate effort as well.
Yeah, so I just wanted to say that I think that it's a great initiative from so many perspectives. It's good for the community. It's good for those people. It's good for us, and just heads off for Jenn for starting it and running it, and she's amazing.
She did one other thing, interestingly enough, on Twitter. I think it was this week. She basically, I don't know why she's doing it. She must have an article or something in mind, but she was asking what are the features of Groovy that everybody likes, and a bunch of people chipped in with, oh, I like the meta programming, or I like the AST transforms, or I like the Elvis operator, you know, on and on and on. I'm wondering if she's got some summary planned, or if this is going to wind up in a presentation somewhere. But yeah, she's been doing a lot for the community there, and it's always good to see. Of course, that what the segue I meant to use was that when she was doing some of that job placement, that's a reminder that you've got a job opening, don't you? Do you want to say something about that?
That's true. I'm looking for expanding my team dramatically, and I had a lot of open positions. Some of them, knock on wood, looking good in potential candidates, but we're still looking for great people to do developer relations, to be developer advocates, and have a lot of fun with coolest technologies, including, of course, Groovy.
Well, I do hope that you get a lot of people contacting you for that. We should
Well,
also
with
go ahead.
our popularity, I expect like a huge typhoon of resumes coming my way starting about now.
Well, I would, but I'm already a little busy. You know, I would
Yeah,
think
yeah.
about it, but you know, right now I've got some commitments, and it's just be a little awkward.
Yeah, and you know, it's California, it's Silicon Valley. I don't know if you love the lovely weather that we have now during winters, or you prefer snowstorms and stuff. So it's not for everybody. Winters with 60s, I don't know if you can stand it. It's not
You're,
for everybody.
now you're playing nasty. Yeah, that's really mean. We're looking at a few more inches of snow here this weekend, and it's like, oh cripes. You know, I'm already ready for it to be done. I should mention, of course, also that OCI still is hiring. You know, they've already expanded their Groovy and Grails team to have, I think they're up to like 14 people now, and they're still looking for more. So if you're interested, contact them as well. I mean, if you can't qualify for JFrog, you know, it should certainly look at OCI as your fallback, what we used to call our safe school, you know, something like that.
I think that's amazing that they keep hiring, and I would say that's my at least the best argument where to answer all those Groovy is dying and Grails is dying, and they are not relevant anymore because Kotlin. The fact that those guys grew from one person to 12 in a year, or I don't know how many are they, and still hiring like crazy, that's proof that you don't need to worry about Groovy or Grails at all.
Right, and of course they're a distributed team too, so you can hire people all over the world. It's very nice there. So at any rate, just thought I wanted to mention that. We talked about the Grails guides, the call for papers for, oh, I shouldn't skip Greach. Greach, of course, has announced speaker lists for Greach. That Greach is in Madrid, March 16th and 17th, and everyone who's ever gone to that conference has said wonderful things about it. Everybody seems to really, really like it. Are you headed to that one this year?
No, unfortunately not. I will miss Greach. I will unfortunately miss GreatConf Europe as well. I still hope to get to GreatConf US, and that's my at least my hope that I will be able to make it. And by the way, the CFP for I think both great conferences, both EU and
Well, no, it's different. The EU one, the European Great Conf, the call for papers ended yesterday. That was January 31st. But the US conference, well, let's do this in order. Great Conf in EU is May 30th and June 1st. Okay.
Right.
Well, that's actually 3 days, May 30th, May 31st, and June 1st. And then Great Conf in the US is July 25th through 27th. So that's a month later. Oh, a month and a half later, really. And their call for papers is open all the way until the middle of March. It's
right. Okay.
So that's good.
Confused with the EU one. Okay.
Yeah, I'm definitely planning to put in some proposals for the US one.
Me too.
Just because I still feel bad that I missed last year's, and I really want to go this year. I know what you're saving all your energy for, though, right? Is it?
Well, I mean, it's GreatConf and developer is going to be there. I need to
Huh.
be, it will be very, very hard 3 days. Harsh
Well, and I
stuff.
know that you're saving all
I-
your energy because apparently this
Yep.
year's Kotlin Conf is going to be in Amsterdam. So you're aiming for that, right?
Well, yeah, absolutely. Once they
Perfect.
accept the Groovy Puzzlers as their keynote, I'm going there.
That's all we need is the Groovy Puzzlers keynote at Kotlin Conf. Yeah, that would go over well. Any rate, that's everything I have on my list. Is there anything that you can think of? Anything we left out?
No, I think we covered everything, and it was great pleasure to do it as usual. We should do it more often. This is what we say. Eventually, we will do the next one once it is too late. But everything's good. This is how we roll.
Well, hopefully we will surprise Sergio Delamo, the author of the Groovy Calamari, and with a new podcast. He'll be like, "Oh my goodness, I had no idea." Because remember, he expected the next one to be Easter, and looks like we beat that deadline comfortably.
Yeah, no, we're far ahead. We're far ahead. This is
So
what
we really
we
shouldn't work.
deliver on time and even before.
Yeah.
And it's all about managing expectations. Because people don't expect us for any kind of frequency, we surprise them in a good way.
Okay, well, then we'll try to do this again. Maybe at certainly if we can get another one in February, that would be great. And especially if something interesting happens in the Groovy programming language ecosystem. But until then, keep in touch and we'll talk later. So have a good time on all your travels.
Yep. Thank you very much. And you enjoy your time home and good luck for all travels as well. And we will talk next time.
Okay, take care.
Bye-bye.